Jumping in, Eric, you've choreographed or portrayed characters in a number of games. I mentioned God of War, Demon's Souls, Call of Duty. What are some other characters fans may not have realized that you've been in, or were you?
I did this fun Polish game called Midnight Fight Express. Some people might have played this. It was one developer, and we did the a lot of the motion capture for that. That was one of the first things we did when I started my company. In Mortal Kombat 11, I was eight or so of the characters and the gameplay, like Aaron Black. I did Cage, Kano, and I actually got my start in mocap doing Mafia 3 as the guy who gets killed all the time. So and it was me and Dennis, and there's some other guys too. But a lot of the time, if you ragdoll somebody, that's probably it's either me or Dennis in there. And those were hard days, let's say, because it was just we go in and we get punched around and thrown on the ground for 8 hours. It was fun. Yeah,
That's
if you beat a guy up in Mafia 3, that was probably me.
that's amazing. So you know how to ragdoll in real life.
Oh
I
yeah,
just
all the
thought that was just a
ragdoll, like
mechanic.
sometimes it's done by a computer, but I know how to do it in real life too.
Yeah, I got to say, I mean, you mentioned how IGN was instrumental in your career, but I'm kind of curious to know, how does one even, go about becoming like a stunt person for video games specifically? Just, it's so niche, like I, would it be like the same type of pathway like one would take for just becoming a stunt person for movies and TV shows, and you kind of branch out from there? Like, how does that work?
Well, I'm kind of the wrong guy to talk to about this, but I can give you an answer because I know how it's supposed to be done. So the
Yeah.
way that it is typically done in movies is you go to stunt gyms, you work with a team, you go in as like a pad wrangler. They call them ukis, which is what you call somebody in judo that you throw on the ground. You pad wrangle, and then you might start doing some falls, take some hit reactions on some shows, and you're sort of like building yourself up as a stunt performer. And a lot of the time, as a stunt performer, you're coming out from martial arts. Maybe you're a tournament fighter. Maybe you were really big in the demo circuit, whatever it might be. And so, and you typically can, you can get in with a gym or you get in through an audition. And either of those are pretty good ways to get into stunts. And also, if you build a killer demo reel, send it out to coordinators. Sometimes they'll bring you in, right? The way I went in was kind of through in a weird way, came in kind of inspired by skate videos in the 90s, where I said, well, I don't have the talent to audition. I can't go in and kick vertically. I can't go in and do a standing, backflip with a twist. I can't do that stuff. And I'm really bad under pressure, and I'm terrible at ad-libbing. And that's what they have you do in auditions a lot of the time. And so I just made action movies in my backyard back in 2001. I had a stunt team called the Stunt People, and I did that for about 15 years. And that got me noticed slowly as somebody who knew how to perform for camera, but could also actually direct and edit films. And so that actually brought me in on a different level as a previs, as stunt viz designer. So I would help help shoot and edit all of the rehearsal videos, and then I would make them look like short films. So I did that for Altered Carbon, Good Day to Die Hard. I performed in that. I did this film called The Heart. So I kind of came, and there's a lot of other people out there that kind of go in this way as well. But I would say that the typical way that you get into stunts is through gyms and through auditions. Now that route is very different. Well, the path is very different for video games. And frankly, I don't know if there is a path. Back in 2015, I had this harebrained idea of doing Tekken videos where I would do Tekken moves in my garage, and I would put it side by side with the original, just to see if I could mimic these moves from characters. And I could kind of pull it off. And so I put them side by side, and I put two of them online, and they went viral. I trended on Facebook. And then IGN started running them as well on their YouTube channel and on their website, and that got the attention of the animators for God of War, and
Oh wow.
they had discussions about, because the thing about animators in video games and in motion capture is that they're constantly watching reference videos and they're watching, animals. They're watching animal attacks. They're watching Ukraine war footage. They're watching all this stuff because they're trying to look for, ways to bring human movement to characters. Sometimes animal movement, right? And they were watching my videos for reference, just to see, well, how are kicks done? How does body weight work? How does, when you throw a kick, what happens to your clothing, right? They're always looking for that stuff. And finally they said, well, let's just bring this guy in because he knows how to move like a video game. And that was a funny call because they said, hey, you know how to move like a video game character. And I thought that's a very strange kind of skill. And it all made sense when I actually started auditioning and shooting for God of War. But that was kind of how that happened. And then after that, it was a lot of trying to network with game companies at game conventions, E3, GDC. It's very hard. So I don't have the best answer, but I think that people who can put together a reel that is very appealing for animators, that animators will want to look at. If you can put that up, and if you can survive the audition and survive the game capture process, then you can make it.
So you mentioned the game capture process. What's that kind of entail?
Okay. Well, I was trained in martial arts. I came into God of War with about 15 years of martial arts experience, right? And let me just give you an example. So in boxing, if you want to throw a cross punch, you drive, like if you're in your right-handed cross punch, you drive your right hip forward and you push kind of with your toes. And and it's kind of the same for a hook punch. Now, when they asked me, they said, okay, one of the moves was a right cross for Kratos, or it was a right hook. And so I did it, and they said, okay, cut. You have to step with your right foot before you throw that right cross. And I'm like, what? That's not boxing. And they said, we know. This is not a boxing game, sir. This is God of War. You need to look like God of War. And I, for me at first, I was like, this goes against everything I know. It's improper. You can't step forward and throw a punch. That's not true. You can't do it. But then something else in my head said, well, if you don't do it, then you're fired. And so I learned how to move for their combat system, for their character model. And the thing about game capture, is that you have to be able to move in such a way so that it works for the combat system and it works for the character. You got to hit both of those things, and it has to look good, because the thing about game cap is that when you do that punch, or the axe swing, for example, we spent a lot of time shooting that axe swing, because that axe swing has to look perfect, because gamers are going to see that thousands and thousands and thousands of times. It has to look good every time. Whereas a performance capture session, they might see it once or twice, then they'll go to YouTube to watch it. But the bread and butter mechanics of gameplay, they're going to be seeing that all day when they're playing that game.
And so it probably
somebody who's put countless hours into God of War, I could feel those. Like, I could feel that effort you put into Kratos. Like, every single punch, every shoulder slam, it feels so meaty when you're playing Kratos in these games. And so, like, it translated very well. So whatever you did well.
Let me give credit where credit's due real quick, if I can.
Yeah, please.
These animators, and God of War animators are fantastic, and the Demon Souls animators, and these top-notch animators. When you give them, the more movement you give them, the better, because it's very difficult to add human movement. If you do a very sort of simple movement, it's very difficult to add movement in, right? So not only, and a lot of them were actual trained martial artists too, so they could translate the animation terminology into stunt words for me, so that I could figure out how to move. But a lot of that, if you were to put my mocap video side by side with any gameplay that I've done, it's going to look very different, because the animators always tune it up. There's always extra stuff that they're doing. But the main goal of a game cap performer is give as much movement and life to the character as possible, because it's so hard for them to add that themselves.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Akeem, what were you going to follow up with?
Well, no, I was just going to talk about just the. I was going to have Eric go into like the differences between, because you mentioned like things that we'll see countless hours. You spent countless hours doing the same movement. So I was wanting you to go into a little bit of detail on like just the difference between like gameplay capture and performance capture, where we have like Chris Judge and the actors who are on they're on set, they're in their mocap suits just as well, but there's a difference between those two things. So
Yeah.
performance capture and gameplay capture.
Yeah, I mean, they're worlds apart.
Yeah.
In performance capture or PCAP, you're kind of tasked with a certain impossible task, which is you're in a white room. You have to keep this in mind. When you're mocapping, you're in a white room. And you have to ask a lot of questions. Am I in a forest? Is it cold? Is it snowy? Are my feet trudging along the ground? Right. A lot of the time, the animators will sort of front load this, or the director will front load all this for the actors. But the actors got to be there, which is really hard. It's like harder than being on a green screen almost, because you're not even in costume. You're in this ugly this like Velcro suit with balls on it. Nobody looks good wearing one unless you're a bodybuilder. You've got this big head cam on you. And I've done some PCAP, and being in character in PCAP is, I don't know how they do it. Like, that's a different like level of acting, in my opinion. So I have a huge amount of respect for being there, and their voice acting. That's the crazy thing too. So, and the thing about that is like you're sort of doing theater. They're recording three-dimensional theater with audio with that, and they're recording your face. You're sort of butt naked for 1 to sometimes 8 minutes on end. And there might be somebody holding a V cam, kind of doing this, or they might be off to the side. You have to keep character in all this, right? So, and then you run that take, and you do that multiple times. You might get through like 5 to 10 sequences in a day. And sometimes there's fight scenes in that too, and that also covers PCAP. There were cinematics in God of War where, Kratos would be fighting another character, and if Kratos was fighting a smaller character, I was usually the smaller character because I'm only 5'6". I mean, I'm 5'8" according to my IMDb, but so like that all is kind of within the realm of PCAP, right? And you're just kind of running a few pages of script off of memory. Okay, let's go to the other hemisphere of movement for game cap. Game cap, if you were to compare the two, and you would understand this, if you were to compare them to martial arts, PCAP would be capoeira, and game cap would be Japanese sword.
Okay.
So when doing game cap, you're tasked with usually a single move, and you have between 1 and 2 seconds to do that move. And you have to tell an entire story when you do that move. And so let's say the move, it's a step forward and it's a right axe swing, for example, right? And you have to do the correct idle pose at the beginning so that it stitches into your idle gameplay. So if you're not touching the controller, right, your character's just standing there, that's your idle. And then you hit attack, and that's when it plays this animation that you're going to record for the motion capture team. So you step forward, you do your attack, and then you go back to idle. And then cut. And that's 1 to 2 seconds. And you put everything you can into that 1 to 2 seconds, and you're trying to tell an entire story, right? You're trying to give all the character, you're trying to hit all the metrics, and you're in a white room in an ugly suit. And they say cut. Okay, that was great. Now, the feedback is, it's going to be critical, and they're going to say, okay, that was great, except your opening idle wasn't right. You need to do more anticipation. You need to add a double step, and then it's actually a triple step this time, not just a single step. Your hitbox is at 45 degrees. It should be at 30. Try and do a head rage when you do it, so it adds power. On the recovery, you stumbled a little bit, hook the end of the weapon, so you're not just pausing there. And when you come back to idle, you really got to mean it and hit your idle pose correctly. So it's like 10 pieces of feedback for one move to be done in 1 to 2 seconds. And when I was first motion capturing, it was, and it's true for every game. It's sort of, it gets to you because you feel like you don't even know how to punch or kick or walk anymore. Mm-hmm. And so what I had to do was I had to start breaking down movement as if it was a sentence. And I would almost treat it like a grammar lesson, where it's like, okay, the beginning of the sentence is the idle. The anticipation is sort of like the lead up. It's like conjugating a verb or something, right? And then the hitbox is the actual hit. The recovery is the thing after the hit is done. And then the end idle pose is back to idle so that they can stitch that into the gameplay. And as I did that, I was able to take all those pieces of feedback and I could kind of drop them in one of these 5 buckets. And it was actually easy to remember all of that feedback. And then time would kind of slow down for me when I would do that. And as I sort of developed that way of conjugating my movement, I called it movement language in the end, then it just became very easy to take feedback. And that's the only way I got through God of War, because they were really, I'm not going to say critical. They were teaching me, but let's just say they were teaching me on every move. I really got my white belt when I did that game.
That's awesome. The way you described it, it kind of reminds me of like analyzing frame data in a fighting game. And so, and like you said, you've been in Mortal Kombat. Did you get to mocap or PECAP any of the brutalities or fatalities in Mortal Kombat? And if so, what was your favorite one?
There was this great one where Kano kills a guy. I think he cuts his throat and he dances with the corpse. And I remember Ed Boon coming in, and Ed's funny because he looks like a veterinarian or something. It's the funniest thing. He comes in, he wears like he's kind of dressed as like, I'd kind of dress like him now, which is funny. He wears this polo shirt and he's got his corduroys on, his loafers. He's like, okay, yeah, here's the thing. He's got this stick figure drawing up there. He's like, yeah, basically you're gonna decapitate this guy and dance with his corpse. What do you think about that? and I went like, I'm a terrible dancer, but it sounds fun, and that was probably the only dancing I've ever done in my life. First and last dance gig was me as Kano dancing with a corpse.
Were you waltzing? What dance was it?
It was a waltz. Yes.
Okay, all right. That's that was gonna be one of the questions that I had, because like I'm so curious, like what type of beats do they give you for that? Like, like obviously it's Mortal Kombat. There's lots of martial arts in it, so you got that down. But like when it gets to the fatalities, like what do the beat sheets look like? Are they just like, all right, you're gonna rip someone's intestines out and then like tie it around their neck, and like how do you interpret that?
Yeah, you kind of just run through it a couple times. They have a pretty good idea of timing. They know how much they can expand and shrink stuff. There's going to be slow motion and all that. It was actually very freeform. We had a lot of leeway. I remember we did a Johnny Cage fatality. It involved a photographer. He had I don't know, there's all these like goofy ones that Johnny Cage had. And we would do like 5 or 6 versions, and they were all very different. Different timing, different kind of action. And they just kind of pick them on the spot. And I think they would take them all and look at them later too. But it's very freeform compared to GameCap. The GameCap is very different because, I mean, it's frames, especially in a fighting game like Mortal Kombat, where it's so precise because it's a competitive fighting game. It's even more restrictive in that case.
Yeah. And so when you saw those for the first time actually in the game, what were your thoughts? Like these fatalities that you were responsible for doing the choreography for. What were your thoughts?
My thought was they should have hired a dancer for that one, honestly.
Now, on the other side of things, for The Last of Us Part 2, you also did death animations for a lot of the people that get choked out or taken down. Do you have a favorite in like death animation from The Last of Us?
I remember doing a hammer swing in that game. I play an NPC, and I came in, and the animator was like, "Okay, it's gonna be a hammer swing. You gotta go 6 feet and swing a hammer." And I did it for 2 hours because I just couldn't hit the mark right. And after 2 hours of swinging a hammer, you forget how to swing a hammer. And I went home and I was trying to like fix the house that night, and I couldn't do it. It was like modern times. I was way off. That game was it was a pretty short stint on that game. I just did a lot of deaths, but I died a lot that day, many times. And when you do a death animations, you're trying to give, especially in something like Last of Us, you're trying to give something visceral, right? Now you can't just sit there and die like a normal human. Normal people take a long time to die, and this gets dark. But you asked about death. And so, I'll usually ask, well, how long do I have to die? Like, what's my time limit, right? And like, oh, you got to die within at least like maximum 3 seconds. Like, okay, well, how do I give viscerality within 3 seconds? And, some of the things I would try was like disbelief, right? Like I can't believe and then some kind of, whatever it is, right? And I'm trying to act like a guy who's dying. And after doing that all day, you start to kind of like go into the well of like really horrible stuff that you've seen. And you're like, should I think about some of the horrible YouTube videos that I've come across, or horrible, Telegram videos I've come across? But that's sort of like, that's sort of something I took from that on a more serious note, which is that, death is like when people die and a gamer sees a character die, it has to still look human. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to look terrible, or like it doesn't have to look mean. But everybody has a plan for tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like everybody had a plan going before they died, and so that's where I always try and put myself. And I guess that that's sort of my contribution to the art of dying.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you jumped into. You didn't do any golf swinging in The Last of Us Part 2, did you? Did you do any? No.
No, I'm a terrible golfer.
Okay, good. No, I just want to make sure, just for the people watching and listening, so that they don't direct any hate towards you if you did any of the golf swinging animations for that. But yeah, you also did stunts for Spider-Man, Insomniac Spider-Man. I'd love for you to talk about your experience working on that particular game.
Yeah, that was a PECAP job. I did. I know his name. I swear I do. Who's the guy with the hat? The Derby. Who's that character?
The Derby. When you said hat, I was going to say Kevin Feige.
The bald guy. Excuse me. He's the bald guy. The name escapes me right now. What's his name? Well, anyway.
The bald guy. Let's.
Okay. Well, anyway, I did that guy, and we did I did a fight scene with Spider-Man, and that was all PECAP, and that's much more,
Oh, wait a minute, Kingpin. I'm
Kingpin.
sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. I was like, I don't know if it's Kingpin or if it's like, I'm like trying to dive deep.
I was thinking, if you said like big and fat.
Yeah. And what's funny is that I'm not big. I'm only 5'6". I mean 5'8". But when you put the mocap suit on, and they do live viz, so that they actually put the character model on you, the rig, and then you can look up and you actually see yourself moving as that guy. And so it changes the way that you move, right? So when my normal stance is whatever it is, but then when I look up and I see Kingpin, I see he's bald and he's huge, right? And it just kind of naturally kind of changes your kind of everything, your affect. And that's actually very helpful. That's actually really crucial for a performer to have that live feed so that you can see it happening. And then Spider-Man is much shorter than Kingpin, but in the game, like Seth, who is Spider-Man, is the same height as me. So whatever the animators did to make that work, they did it.
Now, I definitely want to talk about your book because we're here promoting that. Tell us what pushed you to write it and what you're hoping people are going to get out of it.
Well, when I started doing, so I did God of War, and like I mentioned, I came up with this idea of movement language, and I had this other job come up, which is Demon Souls, and it was actually at the same place. It was just the next day after a God of War day, and they said, "Can you come in and just try out this game?" I didn't know what it was at the time. I said, "Sure." So I went in, and different team, different director. Director said, "Hi, how are you?" This is it was a team from Japan, and they said, "Okay, so first move is a right hook punch." So I said, "Okay, I've been doing God of War for a year and a half. I'm kind of an expert at the right hook now." And so I went in, I did my right hook like Kratos, and they said, "No, cut. No. This is all wrong. Like you gotta stop moving like that. That's American movement. This is a Japanese game." And I went, "What?" He said, "It's all about the pose at the end." And I started wondering, when you look at Demon Souls, you look at anime, and you look at samurai films, it's true. The main sort of keyframe is that end pose, right? Like, I mean, sometimes you don't even see the hit. You'll just kind of see the end, and the guy's holding the sword, and then the trees are falling, and the guy gets cut in half. And yeah, that's kind of an anime trope, but it's also sort of like the operating system of Japanese gameplay movement, it seems, and even a lot of samurai movement. And then as I did Demon Souls more and more, and I was doing I did this movie called Blindsided, um, where it was a fan film of Zatoichi, and so I was learning Japanese sword at the time, and I was kind of learning how to move in that way, where it's like you're doing as little anticipation as possible. You're really just kind of getting to the end of the movement, and I realized that when I was doing Japanese movement, I was conjugating the sentence differently, or I was doing different grammar than the American movement style. It was very minimal anticipation, very minimal hitbox, and a big end pose in the recovery. And I started asking Japanese developers, excuse me, the way that I'm moving, is this like related to the language at all? The Japanese language? Because I took a little bit of Japanese, and in Japanese, the verb comes at the end of the sentence. In English, it just kind of comes after the noun. You can kind of interrupt each other. You kind of know what you're talking about. But in Japanese, you don't know what anybody's talking about until they're done with the sentence, because you got to wait for that verb. You don't even know if it's positive or negative. And so it sort of like induces that same kind of ramping feeling. And I started wondering, like, well, which one influences which? Like, does language influence the movement of violence, or does the movement of violence influence language? And I would just hound these poor Japanese animators. I called this one guy up like at midnight sometimes. Like, wait a minute. I was talking to him through this, trying to figure this out, because there was some kind of connection between violence and language. And what that meant to me was that the way that you punch, the way that you kick, the way that you die is sort of like tied in with language somehow. And I really wanted to understand then what it was about violence that was so unique with people, because it is unique. And we tend to think that violence is animalistic, it's inhuman. We can agree it's bad, but is it actually inhuman? Is it actually animalistic? And actually, it becomes very difficult to understand violence when you cast it as just being animalistic, right? Then you start looking at people who commit violence as just animals. Like, we just got to control this animal. And I don't think that's working very well, frankly. It seems as though violence is very lofty and has like a mission, right? And we don't have to agree on whether it's good or bad, or we can agree that it's bad.
Yes, 100%.
But we can actually talk about it in human terms, I think, and that's really what I wanted to get at with this. And I think that there's a lot of people out there right now who want to understand violence, but it's difficult because, again, we cast it in these very animalistic terms. And I tried to put a grammar to it, essentially.
Yeah, I love your approach to it. I mean, like, comparing, the way humans approach violence to animals, like, because there is like a bit of unpredictability when it comes to humans. Like, we're like, when animals go at it, they're just using their teeth and their claws. You don't, like, if you and I were to get into a fight, not a real fight, but if we were,
I can't fight in real life. You'd probably slaughter me.
But you don't know if I have like a knife or a gun. You might have a spear.
Yep.
You might just pull it out of your back and like, oh, you got a spear. Now I got to kind of like back away. So like I love how you kind of like talk about that. Like, we're, even though like we are animals as well, but we're just, I guess the way we approach violence is vastly different.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is sort of like the ultimate dividing line between, if you're going to say that we're animals, it's like, because we're quadrupedal and we have a spine, we have hair. I mean, maybe that's like an overall definition. But then when you look at, the mechanics of violence with people versus the mechanics of animal combat, or even just like look broadly at animal combat. Animal combat doesn't threaten any species. Right, and combat, as in not predation, as in one species attacking a different species, but I mean a species attacking its own, and they tend not to wipe themselves out. And it doesn't seem to be a problem. In fact, I would think it was Franz de Waal in his book said you have to be very cautious working at a chimpanzee zoo. They have to coach new employees at a chimpanzee zoo not to intervene when they fight because they need to fight. And fighting is not catastrophic to chimpanzees, who are arguably the most dangerous of all mammals when it comes to combat, because they do kill. But it's really like their lethality compared to their non-lethality. Their lethality is minuscule. It almost never happens, even though their lethality is almost as common as ours, except human combat is actually incredibly rare. We've almost never fight because it's so apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm been reading through the book, and I'm kind of getting to that part where you're talking about that. And I know you kind of hinted around it, talking about, you mentioned about kind of the escalation, and that kind of feeds into your hypothesis, which you kind of termed ROBA, correct?
Yes.
Can you just give a quick breakdown of ROBA real quick, just for the listeners?
Yes, ROBA stands for Reciprocal Object-Based Aggression, which is specific to humans. And I'll put a caveat here. When you mentioned that with humans, you don't know what the weapon of attack is going to be. And there are some species that utilize tools. They utilize tools for predation. Chimpanzees will use termite sticks. And there are there's certain octopus that will use a shell for defense. Even a hermit crab technically uses an object in combat. I mean, its shell is a tool, right? It's not something that it grows. It moves into these things. But the other hermit crab knows exactly what that object of combat is going to be. In chimpanzees, they also know exactly what the object of combat is going to be. And what's interesting about chimpanzees and some other primates too, but primarily chimpanzees, is that sometimes they'll bring a rock, sometimes they'll bring a stick. And those just tend not to do anything in combat. They tend to be more for intimidation. And that, again, is sort of expected because all chimpanzees can do this. And I would assume that if you see a chimpanzee wagging a stick around in the air or throwing a rock, that's probably something they've been doing for 5 million years. I don't think that they've improved much on that, and otherwise we would see a lot more of that. So with humans, it's very different. Like you said, you don't know if I have a knife or a gun. You also might assume that I have a weapon, and I reach behind my back and I have a CD. Back in the day when people gave out CDs, right? I might have a flyer.
Used as a weapon.
Officer, this is not right. And an officer doesn't know. So if an officer is coming in with the situation, so you get into a lot of the de-escalation, and there's a whole lot to unpack there. But again, all I'm trying to do is give this very simple grammar to it, so that we stop thinking of it in terms of animals versus civilization or something like that.
Yeah. All right. So 2 last little things. One thing that you mentioned regularly throughout the book is this kind of mantra kind of phase, which is action is the star. Can you just kind of dive a little deeper into that for us? Just because I would love to just pick your brain on that kind of concept.
Action is the star was something that my mentor, Clayton Barber, coined. And for him, when we did a short film called Rope-a-Dope and Rope-a-Dope 2 together. And those went viral, and they did very well in festivals. And they're on YouTube, you can watch them. And the entire sort of thought of something like Rope-a-Dope, which is that everything sort of revolves around the performance and the movement. That's sort of the story. So the storytelling is done with bodies. In fact, it's a silent film. There's sound, but there's no dialogue. It's facial gestures, but I'm kind of a Keaton-like actor with my face. Buster Keaton. I grew up on these guys, right? Buster Keaton, Chaplin, Harold Lloyd. They're all kind of similar in that they would sort of be deadpan with their faces. They tended not to overdo it. They would just tell the story with their bodies. And that's sort of the legacy of theater, vaudeville entertainment in America. And it's also the legacy of Beijing opera in Hong Kong. And Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, your favorite action stars were trained in opera, meaning not Italian opera. This was theater, as in you did martial arts, you did singing, you also did acrobatics, you did handstands all day, and these guys and these women really knew how to tell a story with their bodies. They were like clowns, right? And so their entire filmmaking style and the entire vaudeville filmmaking style was centered around how do we best portray the body as a storyteller. And that is action is the star. And that's something that I still sort of like honor that to this day. And it's a lot of mocap is that, I find myself sort of embodying that when I go in to do whatever the job is, because I'm telling a story with my body. I have 2 seconds to tell a story. Or if I'm doing PECAP, it's the same thing. I don't even have my voice. You can't even see my face, right? And the animator is watching a 3D model that has no fingers, or sometimes fingers, but there's no face. There's no voice to it, right? And if I can't convey a story, I'm not getting the shot. I have to get this shot right. And so that really helped me. That kind of training in that Hong Kong style of movement that I sort of built myself on really helped me to understand that. So.
Excellent. Now, before we let you go, is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't mentioned yet? I'm just going to give you a chance to, like, there's something that you really want to promote or a part of the book that we didn't get a chance to touch on.
I mean, you can savor that for a second, because I do have something I'm kind of curious. I kind of like, because like, the book kind of really goes into your philosophy on violence and like, like the research that you've done over the years. So I'm kind of curious to know, because I know you said in a video that I watched about how you wanted to kind of like approach Ragnarok with like a scientific model of action design. So I'm kind of curious to know how much of I guess your learnings and your philosophy seeped into the way you approached Ragnarok.
Well, I would say actually the experience of working on Ragnarok is what influenced my theory.
Okay.
The original, the 2018 game, we were playing with this idea of overlapping action, and in Ragnarok, it really became sort of the rule, which was that we weren't. In a traditional American fight, it's, your hands are up, you wind up and you hit, and you go back, and the other guy hits you, and you take a hit, right? And you kind of play, it's this kind of do-si-do, right? It looks very cooperative, you could say. And no matter how messy you might make that, it's still going to have this kind of cooperative feeling to it because it has that pace. And the Hong Kong action is even more cooperative because you're literally two people running to a spot, and you're fighting here, and you're trying to make the best looking shape. It's like a band, right? You're getting together, you're trying to make the best notes, and it's beautiful. It's calligraphy. But the God of War team said, like, no, we want to do something that's different. We want something more overlapping. We don't want it to look like two people are running into a spot and cooperating with action. We want this guy to be hitting here, and this guy's hitting at the same time, but then this happens, and then a meteor comes out of the sky, whatever it is, right? And that to me was scientific because that feels like what actually happens in combat. And so I would break that down as if, okay, well, everybody's got this vector, everybody's got this plan in action. So, Kratos has this plan when he's approaching, like fighting Thor, for example. But Thor has a plan. So who's going to win? Right? Who actually wins this plan? Okay, it's going to be Thor. So Kratos has to act like he had anticipated finishing this part of his plan. But Thor intercepted him, and it's going in this direction. Okay, now we have a new plan. So, and I would always tree diagram it like that, so that it always looks like everybody has a plan. And that way you're sort of showing agency for everybody. It doesn't look like anybody is planning on getting hit, right? Nobody plans on getting hit. Everybody plans on winning. And so that was how I approached Ragnarok with the cinematics. And it made it very fresh. That's also how I approached Mortal Kombat 1. When I told the director, I said, we should really do something that's like uncooperative. We should just look like everybody has a plan. Nobody wants to get hit. Nobody's meeting in a spot and fighting there. We did chapters 5 through 12, and what we would do is it would just be constantly moving around. We had a rule, like you'd never stay in place for more than 2 or 3 moves. You're always moving around because that's how every fight happens. So when I say science, I mean, I look at Instagram, I look at YouTube, and I see people fighting at Waffle House. And if there's a wall, somebody's hitting that wall pretty soon. If there's a chair, somebody's grabbing the chair. It's always going to happen that way, That was my science.
Wow. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no. But yeah, like I said, asked anything else you'd like to touch on before we let you go, Eric?
You know, there's this debate raging about violence in video games, and it's something that I I feel I'm very close to it because not only do I work in it, but I have kids, and so especially after I had kids, I started thinking much more about this. Like, is what I'm doing contributing to violence, or is it helping people not to be violent? And there's always going to be partisans on both sides. There's going to be a lot of data. Um, and what I urge is that, maybe media is more of a conduit for the times. Um, in Jung's book, Man and His Symbols, he quotes various people. I can't remember who it is who said it, but basically, all one can really do during the zeitgeist is to just apply their art as best as they can. And uh, that's just something that is going to happen no matter what. I mean, it sounds very kind of hand wavy to say it, but as an artist, if you're trying to pull back and not sort of, if you're, let me try and rephrase this. As an artist, it's very difficult to hold back so that you don't show what the times are really about. If you're an artist and you are really showing what the times are about, if you're a Michael Jackson, if you're a Bruce Lee, and there's a rage, there's like a power to what you're doing. And of course the adults hate it. Of course they hate it. Of course if they think it's going to corrupt the youth because it's different, right? Because these people are revealing with their bodies what's actually happening. And it's talking to people. It's talking to the new generation. And do Bruce Lee and Michael Jackson cause problems? I don't know. I don't even think it's the right conversation to have. Every situation needs to be discussed on its own terms. And I would just, urge caution against like making some kind of broad statement about violence, being caused by X, Y, and Z.
No, very well said. Well, that's all the time we've got today. But thank you, Eric, so much for joining us. If you guys, listeners at home, are interested, you can go pick out his new book, If These Fists Could Talk, A Stuntman's Unflinching Take on Violence. It's available now via Amazon. And with that, we're going to head back to the rest of Beyond. But thank you, Eric, for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye.